He had always been the quiet one in the room, the one holding the tray, not the microphone, the one refilling champagne in glasses, not making toasts. On the night of the Montclair's 30th wedding anniversary, the grandest event of the month at La Maison de Verre, he wasn't even meant to be noticed. But what happened that night would make headlines. Not because of the diamonds worn by the guests, not because of the imported truffles, or the orchestra playing Vivaldi live. It was because of him, because of a letter, because of a truth no one expected to hear, and the fact that he, the gay waiter they mocked, was the one chosen to speak it. Luca Martin had worked at La Maison de Verre for 4 years. Not many people remembered that name. They called him the soft one, the boy with the voice, or just that guy. He blended into the crystal chandeliers and white linens, the same way silence blends into wealth. He was never late, never loud, never out of line. Yet he never got promoted, never invited to team celebrations, never quite belonged. It wasn't the guests who made it unbearable. It was the tone, the glances, the whispers after he turned his back, the moments when his voice gentle, melodic drew raised eyebrows. The time a colleague suggested he work in a floral shop instead because he moved like poetry. It was never a punch, just 1,000 tiny cuts, the kind you learn to carry and hide. That night, Luca was assigned to table 14 reserved for the Montclairs and their closest friends, a high-profile couple known for their investments, their influence, and their very public traditional values. Everyone on staff wanted to avoid that table. Everyone knew Mr. Montclair's reputation. Luca didn't get to choose. As he poured wine into a crystal glass, Mr. Montclair looked him over, his eyes pausing too long on Luca's hands, his cuff, his manner. Then came the comment low enough to sound casual, loud enough for guests to hear. Didn't think they let people like you serve on big nights. Luca didn't flinch, not visibly. He'd trained himself not to react, but something shifted in the room. A few guests chuckled politely. One woman frowned, then turned away. The orchestra played louder, and Luca, with a practiced nod, continued pouring, then stepped back and disappeared like a shadow. The rest of the evening blurred together. The speeches, the cake, the toasts, and then just before dessert, a pause. The maitre d' stepped forward and tapped a spoon against his glass. "We have one last thing before we close the night," he said. A letter left by Monsieur Varenne. A hush fell over the room. Monsieur Varenne, the late owner of La Maison de Verre, had passed away 3 weeks earlier. He had no children, no heirs. But he'd built this restaurant from a cobbled cafe in the old quarter into one of the most exclusive establishments in the city. This was his legacy. Per his request, the maitre d' continued. The letter is to be read aloud tonight, by someone he specifically named. He paused. Everyone waited. Luca Martin. Chairs creaked. A fork clinked to the floor. Luca stepped forward slowly, his palms damp, his breath shallow. He had not been warned. He had not even been told there was a letter. A sealed envelope was placed in his hands. Cream paper, black wax, his name written in a script he recognized from shift notes and paycheck envelopes. He opened it. What he read next would not only change his life, but force every person in that glittering dining room to confront what they truly believed about dignity, inheritance, and the value of someone they refused to see. If this story moved you, don't forget to follow Heart Stories for more powerful journeys of dignity, truth, and quiet courage. Because sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the keys to everything. Luca stood still for a moment, the envelope trembling slightly between his fingers. The sound of music had faded. Conversations had ceased. All eyes were on him, but not in a way he was used to. This time, they weren't glancing past him. They were watching, expecting, waiting. He cleared his throat, unfolding the letter. The familiar handwriting curved gently across the page, measured, old-fashioned, and unmistakably Monsieur Varenne's. To those gathered tonight, Luca began, his voice steady but low. Thank you for allowing me to speak, though I am no longer among you. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned in. For 3 decades, I poured my heart into La Maison de Verre, not for fame, not for fortune, but because I believed a dining table could be more than a surface for food. It could be a place where dignity was served without reservation. Luca paused, glancing at the maitre d'. He gave a small nod, urging him to continue. Over the years, I welcomed patrons from every walk of life: artists, bankers, dancers, diplomats. I saw their elegance, their cruelty, their loneliness. I saw their kindness when no one was watching, and their arrogance when everyone was. In my final year, the letter went on, I grew increasingly aware of a disease that would not spare me. I knew time was short, and so I began to observe not the guests, but those who made the experience possible. I watched who cleaned the glasses, who remembered a widow's favorite tea, who stepped aside without being asked. And I noticed one man. A murmur moved through the crowd. Luca's eyes hesitated on the next lines. He never sought attention, never demanded praise, but his grace was impossible to ignore. He reminded me of myself at a younger age, so careful not to offend, so practiced at shrinking into the corners of grand rooms. Luca swallowed hard. He once had the chance to file a formal complaint against a colleague who humiliated him in public. He chose silence not from fear, but from loyalty. He didn't want the restaurant's reputation stained, even when his own pride was bruised. That act stayed with me. In my last months, the letter continued. Luca was the only one who noticed my growing frailty. He didn't ask questions. He just stayed late without clocking hours, adjusted the lighting when my eyes hurt, carried heavy boxes when I insisted I could still do it. He served this place not as a job, but as a second skin. Someone in the back coughed. Another whispered, "Is this real?" Luca blinked, the ink beginning to blur as his vision swelled. That is why, the letter declared, I have amended my will. 40% of La Maison de Verre shall be transferred to Mr. Luca Martin, effective immediately. A gasp rippled across the room. Let this not be seen as charity, the letter added, but as recognition. For every unseen gesture, for every moment he chose dignity over bitterness, for every time he stood where no applause reached, yet still gave his best. The room was silent. I asked that this announcement be made during the Montclair anniversary, not by coincidence, but by design. Years ago, when I sought investment to rebuild the West Wing, the Montclairs declined, stating that my lifestyle, and I quote, wasn't a match for their brand. I never forgot. A sharp intake of breath from someone at table 14. I do not hold hatred, but I do believe in timing. Tonight, we gather to honor a long-standing marriage. I hope we also honor the values that outlive time: respect, fairness, and truth. And I hope, as you finish your meal, you reflect on who truly serves you and what it means to be worthy. Luca lowered the letter. His hands were no longer trembling. He expected claps, or perhaps outrage, or at least someone to speak. But for a long moment, nothing came. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thoughtful, a silence that required processing. The maitre d' stepped forward and gently took the letter. "Thank you, Luca," he said, his voice just above a whisper. Mr. Montclair stood abruptly. His chair scraped the polished floor. He did not speak. He simply looked at Luca, jaw tense, fists curled, and walked out without a word. His wife remained seated, her eyes misted, lips pressed tightly. Behind them, the orchestra resumed, but only faintly, unsure whether it was appropriate. Luca returned to the edge of the room. He didn't leave. He didn't cry. He just stood quietly, the same way he always had. But something had shifted. Not in the lighting, not in the music. In the way people looked at him, they saw him now. And that, somehow, changed everything. The following morning, La Maison de Verre was unusually quiet. No one spoke much during prep. The clatter of silverware, The hiss of steam from the espresso machine, everything felt muted, like the city outside had dimmed its volume. News traveled fast in places like this, where waitstaff had sharper ears than journalists and rumors moved faster than kitchen orders. Luca arrived early, not because he had to, but because he always did. The apron still fit, the rhythm of setting tables, polishing glassware, checking the corner flowers, it was all muscle memory. But something had undeniably changed. He had barely stepped into the service hallway when someone stopped him. It was Matt, a senior waiter who had once trained Luca on his first shift. Back then, Matt had joked about Luca's two pretty hands and once switched his station so Luca had to serve the back alley terrace instead of the main room. He'd never apologized, never looked twice. Now his expression was forced friendliness wrapped in self-preservation. "Hey man," Matt said, his tone light. "Heard the news. Wild night, huh? Look, if you ever need help navigating, like, ownership stuff or talking to press, I've got experience dealing with media." Luca met his eyes, not coldly, but without the softness he used to carry in conversations with Matt. "I think I'll be okay," he said simply. Matt hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside the break room, someone had left a box of pastries and a note. "Congrats, Luca. Proud of you." No name, but Luca recognized Anna's handwriting. She didn't say much aloud, but she never missed a detail. Later that day, the restaurant manager who had once said Luca's demeanor might confuse traditional patrons called a staff meeting. It was formal, fast, and uncomfortable. "We're entering a new chapter," he announced stiffly. "As some of you are aware, per Monsieur Varennes' final will, Mr. Luca Martin is now part owner of La Maison de Verre." A pause. "I ask that we treat him with the same respect we extend to all leadership. There will be adjustments to roles and operations in the coming weeks. Questions can be directed to my office." There were no questions, just glances, respect. After all, is easy to fake in public. The real shift happens in private. 2 nights later, Luca was in the back hallway between the wine cellar and the kitchen when he overheard Matt again, this time whispering to another server near the service lift. "I'm telling you, it's insane. One dramatic night and now he owns the place. It's not like he invented something. He just read a letter. He probably knew Varenne more than he let on." The other whispered, or maybe there was more going on. The innuendo stung more than it surprised. Luca walked past without acknowledging them, but something in him snapped, not in anger, but in certainty. He returned to the front, spoke briefly with the maitre d', and requested a private staff meeting. No managers, no clients, just team. The next day, the room was full. Chefs, bussers, bar staff, servers. Luca stood near the windows, the late afternoon sun tracing a path over the mahogany floors. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need to. "I know some of you think I got lucky," he began, "that I stumbled into something I didn't earn, that a letter changed everything." He looked up, directly at Matt, then at others he knew had gossiped. But that letter wasn't about charity. It was about legacy. Varenne saw this place as more than linen and lights. He saw it as a reflection of who we are when no one's looking. A few people shifted, no one interrupted. I cleaned floors here, took double shifts, said nothing when I was laughed at, watched others get promoted because they fit the brand better. And I stayed not because I didn't know my worth, but because I didn't want to walk away from something I loved just because others couldn't see me. The room was still, and now I'm not here to be your boss. I'm here to make sure this place lives up to what it was meant to be, for all of us. Silence again. But this time it didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. As people dispersed, Anna stayed behind. "I wish he could have seen this," she said softly. "He did." Luca replied, "Fine. That's why he chose the moment he did." But the reckoning wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, the restaurant's lawyer, tasked with finalizing the ownership transition, discovered an old staff complaint, buried. unsigned, and suppressed by the previous assistant manager. It was a report years old about a missing envelope of cash tips. The report named Luca as the suspected thief. Only this time, there was security footage that had never been reviewed. The video showed Matt alone taking the envelope and placing it inside his own locker. The footage had never been shown because it had conveniently disappeared from active files, but Monsieur Varenne had made his own copy. Tucked in a folder labeled "In case truth is needed," when the lawyer confronted Luca, he didn't express shock, only quiet understanding. "Can I see the footage?" he asked. He watched it once, then said, "Don't fire him yet." That night, during closing shift, Luca asked to speak to Matt in private. The conversation was short, firm, but not cruel. The next day, Matt submitted his resignation. Some say Luca asked for it. Others say Matt couldn't handle the shame. But Luca never spoke of the matter again, because true reckoning, he believed, didn't come from exposing others. It came from building a place where no one needed to hide. Spring arrived early that year. The city bloomed in soft pastels and quiet warmth. At La Maison de Verre, changes were no longer whispered, they were visible. The lighting had softened. The menu featured notes from staff, not just chefs. A wall near the entrance now held framed photographs of the team kitchen hands, runners, dishwashers. And near the host stand, a small brass plaque was installed, engraved with a quote from Varenne's letter: "Serve with dignity, not with fear." But the change that meant the most wasn't seen, it was felt. It was in the way new staff introduced themselves with confidence, no longer masking accents or identities. It was in the way customers paused before speaking, noticing the presence of someone who once stood silently in the background, but now helped lead the place. Luca still wore the same black uniform. He still greeted guests, still carried trays when short-staffed. But now, when he moved, the room shifted with him. Respect didn't follow title, it followed consistency. One Friday afternoon, Luca received a letter, not the kind folded in envelopes, but a message handwritten on thick paper, slipped under the restaurant's front door. It was from a woman named Eloise, a local high school counselor who had heard about the events at the Montclair anniversary. She had seen an article, watched a short video clip. Her message was short: "I work with LGBTQ students. Many of them feel unseen. We host a community dinner once a year. Would La Maison de Verre consider helping?" Luca replied the same day. Not only would they help, they would host. And so began a new kind of night at the restaurant. One not marked by status or anniversary dates, but by expression. The event was titled "Dress as Yourself." No uniforms, no expectations, just an invitation to show up exactly as one was. The dining room that evening was unlike anything it had ever seen. Students arrived in suits with floral embroidery, velvet jackets, handmade gowns, combat boots paired with pearls. Some had shaky hands as they walked through the door. Others held tight to friends. A few wore nothing flashy at all, just themselves, exactly as they wanted to be. Luca stood near the entrance, greeting each guest. He remembered every name. One student hesitated at the door, a boy of maybe 15, tall for his age but curled inwards. He wore a simple navy dress, clean but wrinkled, and held a small clutch as if it might dissolve in his hands. Luca extended a hand. "Welcome," he said. "You look exactly right, Uomo." The boy blinked, then nodded, whispering, "Thank you." The night unfolded like poetry. Instead of set menus, the kitchen staff prepared dishes based on favorite ingredients submitted by students in advance. Instead of classical music, a student-curated playlist played softly in the background. And instead of speeches from adults, 3 students volunteered to share stories about bullying, about loneliness, and about moments of unexpected joy. Luca didn't plan to speak. He wanted the night to be theirs. But halfway through dessert, the same boy in the navy dress stood up, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I'd come tonight," he began. "I almost changed before walking in. I almost wore pants because I thought someone might laugh." He paused, swallowing hard. But I read that article about the waiter who got laughed at, then ended up owning the place. He turned to face Luca. That gave me the courage to show up like this. There was no applause, just silence, the kind that wrapped around the heart. And then, slowly, one person stood, then another, until the room was on its feet. Later that night, after guests had gone and chairs were stacked, Anna found Luca in the kitchen, sitting quietly near the back exit. He didn't say much. He rarely did when the emotion was too big. She sat beside him, nudging his shoulder. "You know this place was never meant for people like us, right?" she said softly. Luca looked down at his hands, still calloused, still steady. "Then we'll change what meant for means." The next week, they created a quiet fund, modest but intentional. It would help young LGBTQ students in the city attend hospitality school, culinary training, or simply afford a good suit or outfit for their first interview. They called it the Varen Fund for Dignity and Service. Some said it was too small to matter, but Luca knew better, because he had once stood in borrowed shoes, doubted his own worth, and stayed silent when dignity cost too much. Now he stood in a place where people entered through the front door, not afraid, but expected. 6 months had passed since the night of the Montclair's anniversary. The news coverage had faded. The whispers, once sharp like broken glass, had dulled into background noise. But the impact, the quiet, steady kind, remained. La Maison de Verre no longer operated like a place that merely served food. It had become a space of reclamation, a place where people shed the need to fit in and instead were invited to belong. For Luca Martin, the transition from waiter to co-owner never hardened him. If anything, it deepened the lines in his empathy. He hadn't traded his humility for authority. He still took early shifts, still checked the back door to locks each night, still straightened the frame quote from Varen when it tilted a fraction. But his role had expanded in ways even he hadn't foreseen. He now sat on hiring panels, spoke at local workshops about safe workspaces. He mentored new staff, many of whom shared their stories for the first time at the staff table. There were tears, confessions, and laughter, real, full-throated, healing laughter that echoed through the once sterile break room. One late evening in autumn, as the final few candles flickered low, Luca walked the empty dining room in silence. The city outside had turned cold. Raindrops crawled slowly down the tall windows. In the reflection of the glass, he saw himself, not in uniform, just in a soft sweater and jeans, no tray, no mask, just himself. He paused near table 14. It had been 6 months, but he hadn't returned to that table since the night of the letter. Not out of avoidance, but out of respect for how deeply that space had changed the course of things. As he reached out to run his fingers along the chair's back, a voice came from behind. "I thought I'd find you here." It was her Madeline Montclair. She looked different, simpler, a thick scarf wrapped around her shoulders, her earrings modest this time. She held a letter in her hand, not sealed, just folded with intention. "I never got to say anything that night," she said. Luca nodded, listening. "I didn't know about the investment rejection. I didn't know how much my husband had tried to pressure Varen into rebranding. I thought I knew what we were building, but maybe I only saw the stone, not the foundation." She handed him the letter. "I came tonight to leave this here. Not for you, for him." She turned to go, then paused. "And for what it's worth, I see you now. I wish I had earlier." She left without waiting for a response. Some apologies need silence to land properly. Luca sat for a long while after she left, the folded letter resting in front of him. He didn't read it. Not yet. He thought about legacy, about how easy it is to remember who cut the ribbon and forget who swept the floor, about how dignity doesn't always announce itself with a title or a nameplate, but with steadiness, with patience, with not walking away when everything in you says to leave. He thought about Varen and the way the man had never raised his voice, but had always raised expectations. He thought about the students who now called the restaurant their place, even though most had never paid a bill there. About Anna, who had quietly taken over kitchen operations. About Matt, who had left without a word, but whose absence made room for someone more kind. And he thought about the waiter he used to be. The one who walked lighter than air, not because he was free, but because he didn't want to make a sound. That man was still inside him, but now he walked without shrinking. At the end of the week, a small envelope appeared on the community board by the staff table. It held only a single sentence: "Thank you for not letting the light go out." No signature. But Luca recognized the handwriting. It was from the boy in the navy dress. What does dignity mean to you? Is it something you've been given or something you've had to protect in silence? Tell us in the comments, because your story matters. Follow Heart Stories to honor those who walk quietly, love deeply, and lead without ever needing a spotlight. Sometimes, the greatest transformations begin in the moments no one sees until the light finally finds them.